know I was a liar. And then I could blame it on the traffic and the traffic lights, but that would be an excuse. I just left 7 minutes later than I should have this morning. Sorry about that. That's the way that goes. I don't know. Does anybody know what a Roman fastus is? You'll see them actually in courtrooms. If you go, in fact, if you ever have to go to IRS court, there's one hanging on this side of the judge, and there's one hanging on that side of the judge. Years ago, they actually had them on the back of a Mercury dime. You know what a Mercury dime is? The dimes that were made from 1916 to 1945 had a lady on the front of it that had a hat that was popular during the 19-teens, but it had a wing on it, so everybody thought it was Mercury. But it really was just supposed to be Lady Liberty with a winged hat. But everybody calls them Mercury dimes. Well, on the back of it, there's a Roman fastus. You wouldn't know it if you looked at it, but if you took the LA badge that they wear in Los Angeles, their badge is designed to look like the Roman fastus. It's sort of very loosely based on it, so it wouldn't, if you picked it up, you wouldn't know it unless you heard them tell the story. Well, what a Roman fastus is actually a symbol of justice. And it actually is a symbol of authority in justice. It was handed down from kings, and the Romans handed it down from one Roman leader to the other. And what it is, it's a Roman's executioner's axe surrounded by rods, which is saying that the person who bears this has the right for corporal, which would be like a punishment by beating somebody with a rod, or capital punishment, which would be by executing somebody. Now, over time, the Romans sort of liked punishment a lot, so it was almost to the point was, if you go to war with us and fight nicely, we'll nicely chop your head off, and if you don't, we're going to beat you to death with rods. So, it turned sort of sour. Well, it's sort of interesting that hangs in our courtrooms, different places, and it hangs in the IRS on both sides. They want to emphasize the fact they have the right for corporal and capital punishment. We don't like that symbol of justice, do we? That's not the symbol of justice that we normally think of. The symbol of justice we normally think of is Lady Liberty, or Lady Liberty Justice. And we know her by having 2 scales, right? And then we see her, what else? What does she have around her eyes? Blindfolds. What does the blindfolds represent? Yeah, that she doesn't look at the person and judge it based on who they are. And then with the scales, it's measured in merit. Basically, what she does is try to measure it. I don't know if y'all remember, if you ever saw Monty Python's Holy Grail. There's a scene where they were trying to determine if this lady was a witch or not. And so they finally take her to this scale that is just a board across the top, attached to 2 boards on the end, with some rope hanging down, and she weighed the same as a duck, so therefore she was a witch. Long story. But there wasn't really justice there, right? She was going to weigh the same, because it didn't move up and down. She was going to weigh the same as a duck, no matter what. But she's supposed to have these scales to weigh what's right and wrong. Now, other ones will have her with a snake around her feet, which will represent evil, trying to tempt Lady Justice. In the United States, sometimes you'll see her, instead of having scales in her hand, she'll have a book in her hand, and that represents the Constitution, that she's supposed to judge based on the Constitution. But all those things represent something to us. Like I said, she's beautiful, which represents the beauty of justice, right? She's impartial, right? We talked about. She's blindfolded. The scales are judgment and merit. The other thing that I forgot to mention that she's got a sword in her hand. And the sword represents judgment, but it's actually a very sharp sword, which represents quick justice, not like it takes a long time. So those are the things that we talk about with justice. Now, when I was at Hillsborough, I taught a lesson a few weeks ago, and at the end of the lesson, this guy was back and he said, if I was king, these are the things I would change. Dun, 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 dun. He starts going through all the things if he was king. Well, I'll tell you what I would change. If I was king, I would change the justice system. The first thing I would change is tort. I'd have tort reform immediately. You know, we're supposed to be, you know, one of the guys came to me, I was talking to a inner city minister, and a black guy that lived inside inner city, and we were talking about the problems of Nashville and the crime, and this was years ago, it hasn't gotten any better. And he says, you gotta understand, he goes, it's not called the justice system, it's called the criminal justice system. And there's a reason for that. First of all, you had the civil courts, which would handle civil cases, like if you're suing your neighbor over, you know, property lines. But then you have the criminal cases, where you would take somebody who had committed a crime. But he says it's interesting they named it the criminal justice system because it's really not against the criminal, it's really to protect the criminal. You know, y'all may not be, but I am very much for the death penalty. And you got to understand the death penalty is not punishment. The death penalty is actually meant as a to keep somebody from committing the same crime over again, right? It's used to be as a, I'm lost the word for it, but a deterrent. That's the word I was looking for, thank you. It's meant to be a deterrent, so the next person doesn't commit. You know, to punish somebody, you'd lock them away in a dungeon for a long time. That would be the punishment. But to kill somebody is actually to keep somebody else from going out and committing the same crime. And one of my friends used to argue that, oh, no, we want to sit here and, you know, he said, that's just wrong to do that. He goes, you may kill somebody innocent. And I said, I understand that. I said, you know, we're not perfect, we may get somebody innocent, but go through and consider the amount of people that were murdered in the United States last year. And how many people we put to death.
And how many of those people that got killed were innocent?
Exactly.
A high majority.
Exactly. So, you know, I'm in this, you know, it's just like, why are we not doing it? And then we need to do something quickly. You know, we're so slow about responding. Another problem that people have with the death penalty is they say it costs so much money. It costs millions of dollars to put somebody to death because all the things we have to go through. If I were king, I can fix that. You can sit here and you basically go to court, you've got a month, you have an appeal, and if the appeal fails, you're instantly put to death. Stops that, right? You know, we're so scared about, you know, protecting somebody that may be innocent, that the rule of thumb is we would rather let 10 guilty people go free than have one innocent person suffer punishment. So what that tells me is that we'd rather be wronged 10 times. I mean, we'd rather be wrong 10 times than right once. Doesn't make sense. The math's wrong, right? It's all messed up. I've always said that, you know, what I would do if I were king, you know, this is going to be a bad joke. Y'all going to hate me for this. But I've always said that if somebody's caught stealing, you cut their hand off. If they're caught stealing again, you cut their other hand off. And they won't steal again. Or if they do, they won't leave fingerprints. Sorry. That's terrible, I know. Sorry. And we abused the letter of the law to cover up and to abuse the intent of the law. And what I mean by that, what's the Miranda rights? Yeah. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. I think that's a good law. But what happens is, if, let's say, an officer catches somebody in the very act, throws them in the back of the car, takes them downtown, and all of a sudden he hasn't had his Miranda rights read. He won't. Now, there's the letter of the law, which the lawyer will use against the intent of the law. So we abuse that. Now, the other thing that happens is, despite what we say, race plays in to judgment, right? And sometimes it's because you're white, and sometimes it's because you're black. Race can play in to judgment. Wealth can play into judgment. Sometimes because you're rich, sometimes because you're poor. All these things play into our justice system, and they make our justice system not right. I'll tell you a story. This is why I'm a little bitter. My dad worked in Metro for 29 years, and 4 of those years as a teacher, and 4 of those years he was in juvenile detention. There was a young man named Davis there. Davis was in the projects in Nashville. He was 16 or 17 years old. A guy comes to his door. He's lost in the projects, knocks on Davis's door, and asks him, "Do you know where such and such a house is?" And because he had delivery to make. And Davis says, "No, I don't, but my uncle's in the back room. He knows where that is." He goes, "I'll go get him." So Davis goes to the back room, grabs a shotgun for absolutely no reason, comes back and blows the guy away. Kills him right there on the spot. So Dad's sitting in this, talking to Davis. He goes, "Davis, what are you thinking, man?" He goes, "You have messed up your whole life." And Davis says, "Don't worry about me, Mr. Plunkett." He goes, "Tomorrow, a little girl from MTSU is going to come up and evaluate me." And he goes, "The whole time I'm going to suck my thumb." And he says, "And she's going to send me to Central State for a couple of years, and I'll be back out on the street." Sure enough, the next afternoon, Dad's walking out of juvenile detention, and he hears, "Mr. Plunkett!" And Dad turns around and looks, and there's Davis sitting there sucking his thumb. And Dad goes, "How you doing, Davis?" And the little girl goes, "Oh, he's going to be okay." And Dad said, "I want to go in there and slap both of them." Our justice system is all messed up.
Bill,
Yes.
case in point, the guy that killed my mother has been on death row since 1986. They say he had 9 levels of appeals. He has now exhausted those appeals. But thank goodness our bleeding heart governor, he put a moratorium on it to be sure that when they're executed, that they don't feel pain or suffer. Well, excuse me, but what did my mother go through?
Exactly.
If you do the crime, you do the time.
Exactly. Now, here comes the problem, though. I am, as you can see, I can be very hard-nosed. But there's a problem. Never forget, I was listening to a comedian talk one time. And he said, he goes, "I hate idiots on the road. You know, you're sitting there driving along behind somebody, going down the interstate, and you got the blinker on. And the blinker keeps going on and on and on and on and on." He goes, "The guy that cuts you off," and he goes, "it just infuriates you and makes you mad." And he goes, "But don't you hate when you become an idiot?" I love to be hard-nosed. But I got a problem, don't I? How perfect am I?
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. You know, Paul said he was what of sinners? Chiefest of sinners. And I can sort of understand what Paul's coming from. He said it, and we know that he at least stood over people that were killing Christians. But I know what Paul did. And I've got more understanding. God's given me the ability to understand more of the process than Paul had when he decided to do the things he did wrong. And I still do wrong. I still do wrong. So as much as I like justice, can I say that I'm just? No. In fact, when we look at the word justice, justice and just are not just used as far as me making judgment towards people, right? In fact, Micah tells the people that God has showed them what he wants them to do. There's 3 things that God wants them to do. To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before him. So justice is not only judging somebody. Justice is also doing right. And so when I make a statement, like, chopping somebody's head off or executing somebody, I'm making a judgment, but I also got to be very, very careful. Now, everything that I said about justice is actually biblically proven. I went through, and I don't have them for you. Proverbs 21, verse 15 talks about when justice is done, the righteous rejoice. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15 talks about you don't make judgments based on whether somebody's rich or poor. We have a tendency to do that. If somebody's rich, they can pay for lawyers and stuff and get out of things. If somebody's poor, we feel sorry for them. We don't want to have justice go on them. Other passages, Ecclesiastes talks about if judgment is actually slow, what happens. We all see the problems in this justice. But sometimes we're making justice calls when we're not even just ourselves. Which is a problem. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because we need to understand that while I'm not just, God is just. All these things that what I want you to understand from all this is that last time I was here, we talked about that God is immense, that he is huge. And then we talked about that God is good in Sunday morning worship service. What we want to talk about right now is that God is just. In Acts chapter 17, Paul goes to Mars Hill, right? What city was Mars Hill in? Do you remember? Yes, it was the city of Athens. I heard that several times. No. Now I'm gonna. Hopefully, nobody attends there. When I was a kid, I went to in school at Western. I went to a church called 12th Street Church of Christ downtown Bowling Green on Wednesday nights and sometimes on Sundays, but very rarely. I usually here on Sundays in Nashville. But they moved out of the city, and now they named themselves Lost River. Now, why would you name your church Lost River? But the other one that happens is there's actually churches called Mars Hill. I'm sitting there doing the same thing. Why would you name yourself Mars Hill? It was named after the god Mars. I know Paul preached there, but still, it's named after the god Mars. But this is where Paul preached to the Athenians. And you remember what he based his sermon on?
Unknown God.
The unknown God. They took him up there, we want to hear something, and it was the unknown God. And so he brings him in front of everybody, and he starts talking about this unknown God. And he starts talking about he's not distant like other gods. There's so many sermons in this one sermon that he presents. But he's not like other gods that you have to appease him. It's not like you sit here and you try to do things because he's an evil God. And he's not distant either, he's close. He hopes that we'll grope for him. I hate the fact that the word grope has become such a bad term, because that's what it actually means, is for us to blindly reach out and try to find God. And he's not far from any of us. So it's a great passage. You want to go home and read Acts chapter 17. It's absolutely wonderful. But then he says this. He says that he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. And we need to understand, like everything else, that God is infinitely just. He's not just a little bit just. He's infinitely just. He's completely righteous. And so when he is going to judge the world with justice, it means he's going to judge the world with infinite justice. Justice. Let me get that out. So when we look at God, and we need to understand, one of his attributes is the fact that he is just. And so when we come into the presence of God, we need to understand that he is just. And the first area that we need to consider that he is just is the fact that he's just in his rule. In Psalm 89, verse 14, it says this: "Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you." He says, you establish your rule based on you being just. We need to understand God doesn't have arbitrary rules. Now, years ago, if you were in Memphis, Tennessee, and you were a woman driver, you were supposed to have a man run in front of the car with a flag yelling out, "Woman driver." Technically, it's still on the rules, and I'm fixing to get in trouble. And if you see the women in the big SUVs in Green Hills drive around, I think that may still be a good idea. Sorry. But there are some arbitrary rules out there, right? Some rules that just don't make sense. Sometimes they'll change the speed limit. You know, like the speed limit, for instance, is sort of weird. Do you know why the speed limit went back to 70?
Because people were driving 70.
Well, people were driving 70, but what they also realized was that, you know, you take a person and you make them drive 55 for a long period of time, they're wasting a lot of their life behind the wheel of a car. And so they calculated that there would be less life lost by people dying in car accidents than there would be life lost people sitting behind the wheel of a car, is the reason why they raised the speed limit from 55 to 70. But with God, there's never arbitrariness. When God says something, he is just in what he says. Do you know, I heard this guy talking about the evidence of God, proof of God. If you go out and you go out to a stream and you grab a trout and pull it out of the water and you take a bite into it, there are 2 diseases that you instantly can catch that will make you sick. Do you know what happens if you grab a pig and you're really hungry and you just go grab a pig and just chow down on this pig, this live pig? There's a whole lot more diseases. There's about 30-something diseases that you can get from eating a pig raw. Now, the children of Israel were traveling across the wilderness. How well do you think they were able to cook their food? Not very well. So why do you think that God told them not to eat pig? God wasn't sitting there just saying these animals were unclean just to say they were unclean. There was a reason for God saying that they were unclean. Jesus makes a statement. He says, the Sabbath day was given for man, not man for the Sabbath. What does that mean? It means it was given for us. Why did the children of Israel not need to work on Saturday? Because they needed the downtime, right? The same reason why God said leave the ground fallow after 6 years. You work at 6 years, you leave it fallow. It wasn't until years later we determined, oh wait, God knows what he's talking about. So when God gives us laws, they're not arbitrary. He's not just throwing just random facts out and saying, I just want you to do this. I want to see if they're going to respond to this. See how they act towards this. God says things and asks us to do things for our good. Sometimes we don't understand it completely. You know, when I was baptized and I was 11, I didn't completely understand the beauty of baptism. Now I do. Baptism is a beautiful thing. And when God asks me to be baptized, it doesn't matter whether I fully understand it or not. You know what? God doesn't make arbitrary laws. Just do it. Just do it. The very foundation of God's laws are just because He is just. But He's also just in judgment. Now let the fear of the Lord be upon you. Take care what you do, for there is no perversion of justice with the Lord our God, or partiality, or taking of bribes. When God makes a judgment, Him being intimately and ultimately and infinitely just, guess what His judgments are going to be? Just. And so on the day of judgment, there's not going to be you standing here, but God, The problem that Job had with God is he thought God didn't understand everything. Job said, Job basically said, I know God is just, but if I could just plead my case to God, God would see that I'm in the right. If Job is in the right, guess who would be in the wrong? God. Is God ever in the wrong? And that's the reason why God answers Job this way. God answers Job, I am sovereign. He didn't show him pity. He didn't show him mercy. He didn't say, I'm sorry this happened to you. Let me explain. I am sovereign. I am sovereign. I don't make mistakes. And God is just in His judgment. He's completely just. But also, God is just in what He does, in His actions. This sort of I don't understand everything that goes on with God. I don't. This year, as you know, my wife works at Covenant. Why God let that happen? Don't know. I believe that God is either does something, God is involved in it, or He allows it to happen. But I believe that God is just. And why that happened? I don't know. Why some people have cancer and some people don't? I don't know. We've got Sister Autrey that's now 106. Is it 106, Laura? 105, maybe. My mom said, she goes, it's always interesting when you get a birthday wish from somebody that's 105 years old. But her husband died with Alzheimer's in his 80s. That's where faith comes in, right? I understand in everything that God is just. I am small and finite. So I don't understand everything that God does. But I trust Him that He is just by everything else that He's done. So everything that happens, I trust God. He may have not done it, but He allowed it to happen, and He's just. And so I accept it. But, I have a problem with that too. How many people have had kids argue over what's fair or not? That's not fair. What are you doing? That's not fair. You know what? It doesn't leave when they become adults, does it? We still do the same thing. That's not fair. How did he get the new car and I didn't? How did he get the promotion and I didn't? How come they get to live in Florida and I get stuck here? It's not fair. You know, we all cry for justice, right? We want justice. We see the news. We want justice to come down. It's stupid. Okay, this is a side note. Lawyers should not be allowed to advertise on television. It's just terrible. That was the worst thing that happened to TV, was allowing lawyers to advertise.
But if something bad happened to you, you wouldn't know to call 800, 800, 4600.
You're exactly right. So, and what is it Bart Durham says? In fact, Steve North, who, y'all have heard of Ira North, maybe. Ira North was the preacher at Madison Church of Christ for years. His son Steve North is a lawyer in town. And he came in the shop one day, and we had talked before, and he walked in, and I said, Bart Durham. And he goes, no, don't ever do that to me. But one of Bart Durham's saying is, justice, we demand it. Okay, that's what everybody wants to hear, right? But is that really what we want? No. We cry for justice, but what we need is mercy. What we need is mercy. And so that's where we're going to spend the next bit of our time this morning after class. During the sermon, we're going to talk about God's mercy. So thank you for your attention.